Hey everyone, I am doing a VR to Lisa Papez and her tag, Tarot FAQ. And sorry if you hear rustling in the back, that's Lulu. Anyways, I will leave a link to Lisa's original video, and she has compiled several questions into different categories. And the first category is deck preferences. And we'll start off with the question, what are your thoughts on illustrated minors versus pips? I like them both. I am more comfortable with illustrated minors because that's what I learned with, but I've really come to love pips as well. I do find that I am picky about my pips. So for instance, Marseille, the traditional Marseille is no-go for me. And I definitely don't have nearly as many pip decks as I do illustrated minor decks. The one that I've been working with lately is the Tarot of a Moon Garden, and this was actually the very first pip deck that I ever bought. And this, I think people call this like more of an illustrated pip because you do have, the symbols, the suit symbols, but then you also have other details in the imagery to kind of help you with the meaning. And so I do like pip decks that are stylized like this. Another pip deck that I use regularly is my Inspired Soul Tarot. For this one, we have the buttons for the element of earth. We have swords, or I'm sorry, we have pens for the element of air, suit of swords. Paintbrushes for the element of fire. And wine for the element of water. Second question, how do you feel about keywords on decks? I would strongly prefer not to have them. It's not an all-out deal breaker because I do believe that keywords on tarot can have their uses and benefits. And if I agree with the keywords that the creator has chosen and I absolutely love the images, then I would consider getting that deck. But in the words of Bartleby the Scrivener, I would prefer not to. Sorry for the lame literary reference. Next question. How do you feel about borders? I don't mind them as long as they don't look stupid or ugly. Next question. What makes you decide to modify a deck? I will mod a deck if I think that it'll make the deck look prettier, if I think it'll allow me to shuffle the deck more easily, and also if there's something about that deck that is off-putting that I can alter. It's my way of trying to bond with that deck. So for instance, the Enchanted Forest Tarot, I was so excited to get this deck, but I did not really use it at all in the beginning because I did not like how the deck had changed the titles for these suits. And so I decided to trim off all the titles and just, write down the number and the elemental association. And then I went ahead and backed the deck with contact paper. And now I used this deck without a problem. And so that is one way in which I was able to kind of find a resolution for that problem, because I really love the imagery in this deck. I love the theme. The guidebook is great. I just did not like how especially the minors were retitled. So like, for instance, swords became challenges, and I think, pentacles became boons. So I just wasn't a fan. And then another deck that I also modified is the Beautiful Creatures Tarot. And again, this was a deck where I just could not get on board with some of the keywords used. I felt that the guidebook wasn't helpful in certain instances, and that some of the images themselves didn't really lend to what I associated that card to be about. And so I went ahead, chopped off the titles and the keywords, put my own labels down, and I didn't bother rebacking because it just doesn't bother me. And I edged it, and I also reorganized the images. I replaced certain images with others to make it so that the deck worked for me. And again, now I love it. This was definitely a bonding experience, and I have no problems using this deck now. What kind of cardstock is your favorite? I tend to like thinner cardstock, like for instance, Make Playing Cards or Llewellyn or Lo Scarabeo, which I know that other people hate, but I love that type of cardstock is thin and yet it's durable. At least I have found that it's pretty durable over time, and I can riffle shuffle those decks easily. I do prefer matte, but I think that glossy can also be very pretty too. Like for instance, I have the Star Tarot, the first edition, which is glossy, and they have since come out with a second edition, which is matte, but I actually prefer my first edition because I do like the gloss. And I also love linen cardstock as well. Next category is buying and backing decks. Where do you go to look for new decks you may want to buy? Well, believe it or not, I don't go looking. They come for me. So if ever I'm on Instagram or Facebook, in the Facebook groups, on YouTube, it doesn't take me long to have a deck just catch my interest. And the latest one that did that for me is the Morning Calm Oracle by C.O. Kelleher. And I saw this one on Instagram. And I want to say it was on Indie Deck Review, but I can't be sure. In any case, as soon as I saw some of the cards, I immediately backed this deck on Kickstarter. I wouldn't have known about this deck otherwise. It's based on Korean culture, and so of course that means a lot to me. And yeah, this has been a beautiful deck to work with. I've only had it for a little bit. But this kind of goes into the next question, which is, what has been your best and your worst Kickstarter crowdfunding experience? So this, I would have to say, has been the best, maybe the fastest, just because, I backed this, I want to say at the end of August. It was funded in like a day or two. And the creator, she had given an estimated shipping date of early 2021. So obviously I have the deck now, which means this was just a very seamless campaign, and I didn't have to wait till 2021. I have it now, and I'm so happy. I would say in general, most of my crowdfunding experiences have been great because I haven't actually backed a lot of decks, but the one that stands out as the absolute worst is The Last Unicorn Tarot. And Lisa talks about this deck as well in her video, and she and I definitely commiserated over this campaign because it was just hot mess express. But I think what got to me the most was, on top of the creators being very uncommunicative, when they did send an update, there were really no apologies, or at least not to my memory. There was no, we're really sorry. It was like I think they tried to come off like positive and cheerful, but instead of keeping up our morale, it just had the opposite effect, which was to annoy us. And it seemed like they were trying to distract us by plugging other merch. But in any case, was this deck worth the wait of 2+ years? I think so. There was a little disappointment, I'm not going to lie, because when I received the deck, which came with a beautiful wooden box, which was what do you call it? A stretch goal. It was damaged. So one corner was dented in. So that was kind of disappointing. And then this guidebook, which is, again, very nice. You've got this faux leather hardcover guidebook with, colored pictures. But you can see here that it was ripped when straight out of the box. It was ripped here, and the binding was already coming apart. It was already splitting from the spine. And so that was a little bit disappointing as well. And Matt was like, you waited so long for this deck, and you spent money on this deck. You really should ask for an exchange. And I was like, no. I just want this to be over. I just want to move on with my life. So here are the backs. Beautiful deck. Honestly, the production is gorgeous. Another stretch goal, I believe, I think this was a stretch goal, was to have Peter S. Beagle, the author of The Last Unicorn, to give us a signed card, which was really nice. It's a beautiful deck. It is huge, and it's got that rose petal finish, which is hard for me personally to handle. And some of the image choices don't resonate with me, but the art is beautiful. You can tell that the creators really have a love for this story. And Lisa's able to use this deck without any problems. She is a huge fan of this story as well, and she's way more of an expert on it than I am. So I'm kind of jealous that she's able to use this deck without any problems. Maybe I'll try to revisit it later on down the road and try to work with it again, and see if I can just get over some of the things that kind of bother me. But overall, it's just a beautiful deck. It really is. So I am glad to have it in my collection. But the experience of the campaign really did turn me off and put a bitter taste in my mouth for sure. How do you decide what decks you want to buy or back? Well, one of the factors would be cost. I'm usually willing to spend more on indie than mass market, so I take cost into consideration. For the price, do I feel that that's reasonable? Do I feel that that's fair? Does the deck fill a gap in my collection? So if I've seen, if there are walkthroughs and reviews available, I'll usually use those to kind of inform my decision. And like Lisa said in her video, when it comes to an indie deck, I will not back the deck unless I know that the images are done. I just, after the bad experience, that is definitely a requirement of mine. And, if the creator has done previous campaigns, I will just make sure that their reputation is a good one, based on those previous campaigns. There are certainly deck creators out there who have given themselves not so great reputations, and I know to stay away from backing their future campaigns. How much is too much to spend on a deck? I honestly don't know. I do not judge other people for how much they spend. It's their money, it's their business, and I personally can't come up with a number, because whatever price I tell you today, I will probably spend double on that on some deck that I find tomorrow. So I will just say, whatever price that I can't financially afford, whatever price that might give me some extreme and eternal bouts of guilt and buyer's remorse, that is probably a sign that is too much to spend on a deck. Do you have deal breaker cards? Cards that have to feel right to you to pull the trigger on a deck. What are they? Not really. Cards that are more heavy deterrents for me are ones that show animals being hurt or that have been killed in some way. So especially the sword suit is known for sometimes showing depictions of animals being impaled. Now, at the same time, I say it's a heavy deterrent. I have owned the Shadowscapes and the This Might Hurt, and both of those do have a swords card, the Three of Swords with an impaled swan. So it doesn't, again, not necessarily a deal breaker, but that is one thing that comes close. On to the category of reading style. Do you have a daily practice? If not, when do you read for yourself? My practice is just, it has its ebbs and flows like anybody else's does. But in the last few months, I've been doing my tarot before bed. So I will get into bed and snuggle up in my covers, and I will do something tarot related. So whether it's going to be reading a tarot related book, or, doing a spread or exploring a new deck. I do have like a lap desk, and I have my Peggy cloth that is like the perfect size to go over the lap desk. And so I'll put that, I'll use that to do a spread or to, play around with a new deck. So I'll end my evening with something tarot related on most days of the week. What's your go-to shuffle style? My go-to shuffle style is to riffle, shuffle, and bridge, and do that for as many times as I, feel is appropriate. And then I'll end with an overhand shuffle, which I think is kind of funny because I feel like I suck at the overhand shuffle, but I'm always compelled to end that way. And I am trying to practice my overhand shuffle to get better at it, because there are some decks that I can't riffle shuffle. How do you choose which deck you're going to work with? Well, that depends on a few factors. My mood, if I feel like a deck fits a certain season or a holiday. And of course, if it's like a new deck, then that'll kind of move to the front of the line. My Inspired Soul Tarot is obviously in heavy rotation, even though I might not mention it all the time. And I do try a lot of times to, before the beginning of each month, have an idea of which decks I want to work with. But if a deck calls to me that wasn't part of the plan, I just go with it. So for instance, my Everyday Witch Tarot was not part of, the decks that I had planned to work with in the month of November, but it just called to me. I think I needed to have a deck that felt a little something like home, and so I have been working with this, and that's fine. I mean, that I can fit this easily in with all the others. Do you purchase professional readings for yourself? I have never purchased a professional reading for myself, but I do intend to. I just haven't gotten around to it. I couldn't tell you why, but I do intend to. Do you use tarot for anything other than divination? The only thing that I can think of that isn't divination related or personal development and growth related would be that I have played the card game that actually Lisa taught me. She has an excellent video, and I will try to link that if I remember, but it's called Kill the Queens. I haven't played in a hot minute, but I think it's called, Queens of Fate. Queens of Fate. So yeah, I actually used that game to bond with my Tarot Moon Garden, because at that time I wasn't really familiar with how to use a pip deck, but I held on to this deck because I just love the theme and I love the images. And so this was the deck that I used solely for playing Kill the Queens, and that was my way of bonding with this deck. So I highly recommend, if you want to play around with tarot but don't necessarily want to tarot, you should check out how to play this game, this card game, Kill the Queen of Fates. I don't know why I keep calling it that. Okay. All right. Next category is reading for clients. And I'm actually going to skip this category because I don't read for clients. I just read for myself and friends. So we're going to end it here. I hope you've enjoyed this VR. Be well, stay safe, and take care.